I'm just going to go with my gut here. Austin Powers. That's always number one. There's no real reason why I'm choosing this one, except for it's just like the most rewatchable movie, I think. I need to do one that's a little bit more, not Austin Powers. These last two might be just like basic film student kind of movies, but I think I just have to because of how important they are. Not necessarily the extended cut, the OG, but obviously The Exorcist. Don't we all know? I mean, it's just kind of amazing, and it's probably one of the best, like, the horror movies that's not a horror movie. It is, like, one of the scariest things that I've seen, but it's also just a really great drama. It's weird, but 2001 Space Odyssey could be my number one favorite movie ever. This is not that. It's obviously the sequel, but this is great, too. It's apparently Mike Landry said it was one of the best. I am Mike Higgs, writer and director, and you are watching the Film Stock Podcast.
All right, I'm being told that we're rolling.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Film Stock Podcast. My name is Matthew Beltz, and today I have the distinct honor of interviewing and conversing with Mike Higgs.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks for being here, dude. I apprate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So earlier, when I called you, we kind of talked about, all the different projects that you're up to. But if you don't mind, I want to focus on one that really affected me.
Sure.
And I mean this sincerely. Can you tell me about Mason?
Oh, wow. That's actually surprising that you said that one, dude. That one is actually weirdly, we don't talk about like enough, but between like the people that made it and stuff like that. But every time I go back to it, I'm always like, oh, wow, that was a really great time and like a surprise.
It was awesome. Like, was that like filmed during the summer, in the fall?
I want to say that was filmed definitely at the start of the spring, so May. And then we did $12 Words that same summer, like 2 months later after that.
Did you do that back to back? No.
Well, not exactly back to back, but it felt it from just the amount of time that we were working on Mason at the same time of also getting the other short film prep. So it was like they were just still overlapping, you know?
So what was the inspiration for Mason? Like, where'd that come from?
Actually, at the time I was living in California, and Mike Bizzacco called me, and we always just kind of like,
Mike Bizzacco being your producing partner, writing partner.
So we're always usually writing and co-directing partners when it comes to like the narrative, like filmmaking, music videos and stuff. Not so much, but the like the narrative stuff, like the Honagold and Mason and $12. That was all me and him together, and that one was really interesting because he just called me with the idea of the opening, which we didn't know where the story was going to go, but he was like, I think it would be really terrifying to open a movie where you don't see like what this person is looking at in their yard, and she's just picking up toys and all that kind of stuff, and then she looks up and there's a bunch of razor blades all over this playscape house. And I was like, that is the scariest thing that anyone I feel like could see in that moment. And so we just tried to figure out, all right, well, who did this and why are they doing it? And that was kind of how the movie became the story, you know?
Yeah, it was pretty unbelievable. And I got to also pay you a
man.
compliment, because generally I've got a very short attention span, like so short. So when I see that it's a 16-minute short film, like the short film medium obviously being its own unique beast, it's hit or miss what you're doing with that 16 minutes.
Yeah.
Whenever I see 60 minutes, I'm like, okay, here we go. But within those first 30 to 40 seconds in that film, it grabs you.
Oh,
like, especially, like, I don't know what it was. It had something to do for me. There's like a magic to the way you framed that whole thing.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
What kind of lenses did you shoot that with?
That was super, honestly, from the get-go, we've always kind of did run and gun. Like, depending on what kind of budget we had and if we were able to hire a DP or not. And with that movie, we didn't. So it was just me, and we had a crew, like we had a lighting crew and all that kind of stuff, but to actually afford a DP with that kind of camera, we just didn't have. So it was really just me and a Canon C100.
Okay.
And I forget the lens, but I borrowed it from Kayla, and it was like I want to say it was just like a zoom lens, a Canon zoom lens. I forget the actual like millimeters, but yeah, and that thing just saved us throughout the whole shoot. It was basically, I think, done on that whole setup the entire time.
So you just use one lens for that whole thing?
Yeah,
That's crazy,
just,
man.
Just trying to keep it, because the production was, we had a lot to shoot and we had a pretty small production time with, at least we were very limited with what we had there, so we just had to keep at least the camera setup as minimal and run and gun as possible, you know.
How many days did you film it?
We had a week for a week for that one, which honestly is weird because I look back at it now and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I could film that in 3 days now. But
Sure.
It I think back then there were a lot of things that was just, we were trying to do like more professionally and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I think now this could have been cut if we were still working on the same kind of like budget. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's very cinematic.
Yeah.
That's something I took away from it. And what I also appreciated about Mason was the richness of the colors. Would you attribute that more to, because I wanted to know if you did a lot in post for the color. I mean, obviously there's always an edit, you know, there's a post-production workflow. You're going to go in and touch it up, but the clarity of those images was unreal. Well, and the warmth you felt on her face in specific moments was just nuts.
Well, thank you so much, man. Like that, I think the biggest thing that, at least with my own personal stuff, that I try and achieve is I just love the look of film. And I just know I can't afford film. So, you know, doing something that to try and enrich that and try and make it look a little bit more filmic or, you know, photographic and stuff like that, I think has always been my kind of direction when it comes to like our narrative stuff, because I think the things that we're very inspired by, especially for stuff like Mason, are very like earthy films, and trying to kind of capture that was super important. So like, I think I would say our probably biggest like visual or just overall like atmosphere, you know, references were this Jeff Nichols movie called Shotgun Stories.
Sure.
Take Shelter from the, obviously Jeff Nichols as well. Martha Marcy, May Marlene. It's another one that's a movie about a girl who escaped a cult as well. And so I think those things were always just kind of like going in our minds and just kind of thinking about like how we love those styles so much and just trying to kind of capture that. And so that's always just kind of been our like viewpoint with editing it too. So it's like, let's just try and make it look as photographic and earthy, you know?
So it looks like you work with a very small crew though, yet you said you had a lighting team, you know, you had a gaffing team. Yeah. But I mean, how big was the crew on that?
For that, we had one gaffer, I think, yes, we had basically two people in kind of like the gaffing department. Yep. We had obviously our sound guy, and then our talent, and then us and a producer there. So probably about 7 to 8 people in total in that one.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was confined, but it was definitely, we just kept to the schedule and just tried to, and I think that's what kind of brings out the earthly vibe too, I guess, is because we didn't have much to work with, I guess. So we were in the sense of what we could use and the lightings that, like, we even couldn't even plug into the electrical outlets of that house for that movie. So we had to literally do this whole rig with like a generator that was like 30 feet away and all this crazy stuff. So it was just trying to basically keep it within that kind of I guess just low, you know, key lo-fi kind of vibe, you know?
Yeah. So when you're doing the exteriors outside, are you relying pretty much wholly on natural light?
For that one, I think we had reflectors and stuff. With some of the night shots, we didn't have any, I don't think we had too much like outdoor lighting. I think we had a Joker light for blasting, like to make it like to cheat night for day or whatever, whichever it would be. But besides that, nothing outside I think we really amplified with extra lighting or anything. It was just kind of reflectors or that kind of stuff, you know?
So then also, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep harping on Mason now.
I also, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I was also apologizing in advance because I'm awful with film terms. So if I, you know, film set terms and all that kind of stuff. So I've been cursed with this for years where I'm like,
It's all good. We're going to get through this together. I'm going to know exactly what you're saying. But like, when something else I noticed about this movie, and I noticed it also with how do you say it? Is it Honagold?
Yes,
Honagold. Yep. I noticed that you have, and I don't know.
Sorry, that's rude of me.
No, it's all good. You have this interesting ability as a filmmaker, and I'm wondering if it comes during the script writing phase or if it's something that you find in the edit. you have kind of this amazing ability to kind of advance the story through small vignettes. And with Mason, one of the vignettes that I particularly loved, it's kind of a narrow wide shot of the bathroom, and she's taking a shower on the frame right. The gun is in between her and the window.
Yes.
But then you have through the light, you can see all the steam from the shower.
So yeah.
And you just kind of linger on that shot for like a good 15, maybe 20 seconds. Maybe I'm overextending
No, but
it,
you're right.
but-
Like we definitely held on it for a little bit longer for sure.
But it's this beautiful moment where you kind of like, I don't know, I'm thinking about it in a very like symbolic way, but she's in probably the most vulnerable position possible.
Sure.
You know, her armor is just outside the shower, and you've got this open window kind of almost inviting whatever's on the outside in, and you see something boiling up. Is that stuff you just find, or is that something you plan?
We definitely planned that that shot and lingering on it in the script. I think that was like a note in the script when we did it, like we hold on the shot for a minute, but it when we're doing it, everything's going so fast and everything's just happening, is that like as soon as we get into the production of it, it is that kind of battle of like, are we trying to make this look too cool? Are we doing this and doing that? And that shot specifically, I give all the credit to Dave Sikora, who's been our DP on a lot of other things like Honagold, but on Mason, he was our gaffer, and he got it to a point where it was the light coming through was that artificial, like it was an artificial light, it was the Joker light, and just the way he set that up, like we walked out of the room and then we came back in, it looked like that in person. So I was just, let's just roll on this for a good, 30, 40 seconds or a minute at least, just get it. And then everything else was just kind of like sound design and post. But yeah, it was just one of those moments where it like felt like this is just a light way to say that this gun is always around her. It's always like going to be next to her, so she's on alert, at all times,
Which is a nice juxtaposition from kind of the vulnerable state she was in. Again, I love how you just linger on this, and I'm wondering like where the choice comes from. Is it something that you just feel with your actor? Is this planned out? But when she's lying in bed, you got the blue moonlight coming in, and she's kind of touching the curtains, and she's talking about how like her mother had just gotten those, but she might paint the house.
Sure.
Like that was also a beautiful moment. I'm wondering, is that something pre-planned, or is that something you work out with your actor and your DP?
Yeah, that was it's so funny when you talk about this stuff, because to me it like back then it felt so like
natural, not even thinking about it.
It just felt so, low budget and small and all that kind of stuff. And it's like you're just constantly thinking like, is this any of this good? So to hear you talk about it like, I don't know, like 12 years later or something, it's weird. But yeah, that
well, it didn't look lo-fi. It didn't look at all.
That's
like the whole thing had a very high production value to it that I was like, fuck man, like this is something.
That was one of the honestly, that was, I think, me excited with the camera, because it was the first summer, or that first, like I just got the C100, and that was a step up from anything I've ever had. So I think that was just, that kind of thing that really amplified. Let's just make shit. You know what I mean? Let's try and make movies, and let's try and make stuff. With that scene though, that was just me and Bizzacco behind the camera. They set up the light, and then when we came into the scene, we were just all going over it, and we're just kind of improv, talk about the curtains, talk about like mundane things, and we just kind of found what we really liked. And that was probably just some of the more like haunting, trailing things that she would say that didn't have any significant like story addition or anything like that, but it was just something where it's like she's alone and she's just lightly talking to herself. So just trying to find the right beats where it just felt the most, natural and stuff, But for the most part, it was improv. She was, just riffing off of anything. Yeah, it was awesome.
I mean, speaking of which, the actors in this, who are they? I noticed the actor, the gentleman, you work with him quite a bit, don't you?
Yeah, it was Edward Ventura and Ailey Wilder, and they constantly, we've worked with both of them together before too, and so their chemistry is always so good. So when we went into certain scenes with them together, it was just like they kind of knew what we were looking for. And Ed specifically has always he's one of our best friends. So like when we talk to him about projects or anything like that, he's in from the get-go. So
Yeah.
by the time we get to that like stage of shooting, he is always
He's right there with you.
Yeah, he's mentally just like in the character, in the vibe. Like he grew that beard and got the haircut specifically all for that character and everything. So I think it's very easy when, you know, that project, we were very lucky where both of these people were super devoted and just having we were all just having a great time. It was just like a week of shooting and just us trying to figure out how do we tell the story but not tell too much at the same time until the ending. And that all really happened through that collaboration of all of us just kind of talking it out, you know?
Let's talk about locations. Where'd you film it?
That was a friend's house in Massachusetts. And I think with locations, we've always kind of had a similar kind of mentality where we really love already lived in kind of things.
Yep.
So another like $12 words, we shot that at our friend's Connor's house, and that his dad was so cool letting us use his bike garage and like his kitchen, like just his house to shoot. And just we loved how that thing was, you know, the layout of everything. And it was kind of similar to Mason, where we stripped it down, like we removed certain things and everything to kind of have that old rustic kind of like farmhouse kind of vibe. But for the most part, we just kind of loved how it looked from the get-go. So our whole location thing is usually finding something that aligns with what we're looking with, as opposed to trying to like, but it all depends though. It all depends on the project. But for something like that, it felt really worth it to already have that kind of like lived in feel to it, you know?
I do. And I think now would be a good time to kind of switch over to $12 words, because the texture to that location is unreal. So did you find that as is? Was that like the texture you were looking for, or was that like kind of a happy accident?
So I think a lot of the time when we're working on a project, we'll kind of start going off of like, well, how do we want where is this? Like to try in the script, we try and figure out the geography of everything beforehand so we can at least mentally know, okay, this character can walk in here and do that or whatever it may be. With $12, it was a script that Mike Bizzacco wrote beforehand. And then when we went back into it, it started, I think, to be rewritten for the that location specifically. So the garage with the motorcycles and the house and everything like that. So I think all of those elements ended up kind of influencing where the script was going to be changed. Like that definitely influenced like how like the actual location of the script itself. So it's kind of this weird back and forth where we kind of have an idea. We're like, okay, we need them in a location, we need them here. And then rewriting it to that location was really nice, because then it was like, okay, they found their home. They found, we kind of now know where they need to be. And that, like, just again, understanding like the layout of everything is always the most helpful before even going in.
Sure.
You know?
And are we talking like major rewrites, or is it just kind of like simple camera direction, or maybe what they were referencing?
With that movie, I wasn't involved with the writing as much because it was he already wrote it. And so it was kind of like we wrote Mason together, and then that script he was already kind of working on. And so by the time we got to work on that, I was editing Mason and he was kind of fixing that up and working on that. And so it was mainly through Bizzacco. But I think a lot of our conversation was literally just trying to find the right space for them to actually talk and be together. And the idea of just like a motorcycle garage and that lived-in kitchen and all that kind of stuff, like it felt like they were at a family member's house, which was the whole point. Like she even says mom is sleeping, and it's like, all right, so this is a much more lived-in kind of location, and just trying to make it feel that way, you know, the most, you know?
Sure. The thing I also like about Mason and $12 words is it seems, you know, I know that Bizzacco wrote $12 words, but it seems like the two of you have a very strong interest in character.
Yeah.
And I
hope
think
so.
No,
I hope it shows at least, you know, like.
Well, I think it's interesting because, you know, in the short format, right? Sometimes, you know, you can find that it's more style over substance. You know, if you're making a horror short, you know, you really want to kind of check off a lot of boxes. You kind of want to, you know, go somewhere with the genre that gives it your own spin.
Definitely.
But what I like about this is that for me, it seems to be first and foremost about the characters, and they're all going through, some pretty heavy shit, to say the least.
For sure.
And everything else seems to be in service of that. The camera, the lighting, the sound design.
Definitely. It's almost a very invasive kind of like camera in a way, where or just in general, it's a very invasive situation, at least in $12 words, where that shoot was crazy because it was that the actress Ebony Obsidian, she's incredible, and she's honestly, them two together was one of the craziest things I've ever seen, because she came down from New York, and we only had like the night before to all of us to just kind of read the script together.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but they're both so professional that as soon as we went on, that whole shoot was a really interesting. I'm sorry if I'm straying away from your question, man. I'm so sorry.
Take it wherever. I'm down for the ride.
But it was a really interesting shoot because we shot that in the middle of the summer, so it was like in the 90s, and we were just in that garage with this giant light just already hanging over them. So
probably felt somewhat like being in this podcast studio right now.
No, take this and multiply it by 4.
Sure,
and it was crazy. But yeah, they that was I think that shoot prepared me for this moment. No,
yeah, exactly.
But no, they used that, and we did a really interesting approach, I guess, on how we shot that, where it was, let's just keep revving it up. So each take, like, we would give some kind of direction of like, all right, guys, let's make it even angrier and angrier, to the point where it was just like too much. Like they were yelling to like the point, and then we brought it back down. So there was this weird in between when they were coming back down, where it was like just angry enough, but these two characters as characters are exhausted. Yeah. And so it really felt like so natural, and they were so good that like it was just, I think all the things just ended up kind of collecting, like compiling together into something really, at least for us, like kind of magical in the moment. So when we're watching it, there was a moment where at the end where it's a real close up of her face and she's crying, and I remember
before the last shot.
The last shot. And that shot specifically, I remember us yelling cut, and our DP Dave Sikora, he turned to me and he had like literally tears coming down his face, and he goes, "That was really good." I'm like, I guess so. It is. Yeah, like that was crazy. And so I think those moments are hard to kind of like try and even find, and it's just, that was a really big test for me and Bizako of just like, these guys are so good. Like, we have our directions and where we want them to go, and talking out the characters, I think, is a big part of that. And so that has always been, I think, the most important, has been just the actual character from the start,
Sure.
And hopefully seeing where the story takes it. At least with shorts, at least with $12, where it wasn't this big story. It was just kind of a day in the life of this very frictioned like relationship kind of thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would imagine there's also something to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of watching it through, I got the sense that when you started rolling, you let them go through the whole scene.
I think so you're talking about like when the fight starts to like obviously where it goes to. So I think we went up to, we basically segmented it in pieces. So
Oh, you did? Okay.
Well, kind of. So
the only reason I say that is because it feels like, you're talking about letting them find the characters, having the conversations, talking it through. You've got the unbearable heat kind of going down. You're telling them to go harder. The way the camera kind of functions, it feels to me like it's unrelenting, and it's just it's not letting the audience go.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of the approach from our DP Dave, where when we were talking about it, the handheld or just on the ground, I guess, kind of feel between the two of them was really important to capture, and we had a big difficulty trying to find where are they stationed in the room, like. What is she doing and what is he doing in this room? And the dialogue was there in the script, but the actual movements and placements and blocking and everything was so let's figure it out together kind of a vibe throughout the day. So with that specifically, trying to figure out something that was natural and not awkward in kind of a pretty open garage where they can still be intimate, like in like the conversation, but I don't know, there still has to be a distance too. So it was just trying to find that kind of balance between the two. And I think that did come out from the actual style, like the actual like handheld kind of vibe that Dave was doing. But again, it was one of those things where we needed to design the day in segments. So I think Dave, me, and Bazako, we
it's
all
a long
kind of
scene.
It's really long and it's really tiring and exhausting, and everyone is in there, so it's like everyone's just hot and just sweating and like, but we're all like fine with it because we're like, all right, this is just, we're all uncomfortable, let's do it. And yeah, so with that scene specifically, it was really interesting to like kind of find that just balance of how to do it and try and find the right, like basically sweet spot of where the right performances are. So that room was almost like kind of a big, we just had the full day there. Yeah. And I think we had one scene to shoot like in between, like we basically
the inside scene, so it's kind of broken up into almost two acts with a little bit of an intermission that takes place inside. So did you kind of break those two segments in the garage up like that?
I think I'm forgetting a little bit of how the schedule of everything, but one of we definitely separated the two. We separated the kitchen day for to shoot another day, and then just because we knew, or I think what we ended up doing was the kitchen, and if I'm not mistaken, the beach scene in the opening, and then the ending where they're walking.
So that was all kind of lumped into one day.
We tried to condense it down, but I think stuff happened with the schedule where we're like, we have to do it this day, and
all
that kind of stuff. So it's like,
it always does.
From what I can remember of the game plan, I think that was the game plan where we knew that garage scene is just going to be a full day. That's going to be it. But that was a really fun experience to try and kind of navigate in that room and try and figure it out. It was exhausting and miserable, like it was so hot, but it was really just a blast because, again, this was the first time we were meeting Ebony, and we've worked with Ed obviously multiple
How'd you guys
times.
get in contact with Ebony? Was that like a casting call?
Literally casting call, which it all depends on what we're doing. So, but with this movie, we did a casting call, and we've got some really great, responses back for the character. And then her audition was just, I think her sister or friend just filming it like on their phone. And Michael's like, dude, this is treasure right here. This is the character literally right here. And I'm like, all right, that's perfect. Like that is literally perfect. And so even just how she understood the character, it was just kind of a perfect match kind of thing. And then when Ed was a last minute hire because he lived in California at the time. So we weren't going to initially use him as the lead actor as much as we love working with him. But then we couldn't find anyone that was as good as him, as at least what we thought. And so he flew down and did it, and it was awesome. Like the chemistry between the two was insane.
And they all just kind of picked it up like within a night. Like, they kind of had that initial read
had the
together
script and everything beforehand to kind of understand who these characters were. But
in terms of making that connection and trying to be comfortable with each other as actors, that happened in no time.
The argument, the level of fighting and everything obviously wasn't brought up to that kind of, the severe level it is in the movie. So by the time we get to the shooting, we don't know really how crazy or explosive the characters are going to be with each other, and it was wild. It was kind of like watching it actually happen, where it felt very much like how we were shooting it was almost like a documentary kind of vibe. But that was it was weird. It was definitely a wild shoot for sure.
Damn, that's crazy. So between Mason, and I guess I'm jumping back and forth because you did say that you filmed them at completely separate times. It probably had a completely different editing timeline, but what was the editing timeline process like for both of these films?
Wow. Oh my God.
It seems like you do your editing, don't you?
Yeah, I do. That's honestly probably like my main bag is editing, where it's like, but when it came to those two movies, it's hard to like kind of even remember that far back, but I remember working on a 48-hour film festival with Dave as well, and I remember showing him the like clips of the edit when we were working on that, and that was right in between doing Mason and $12. So I think Mason was maybe like a 2 to 3 month edit until we finally like locked it, but like it goes through the music, it goes through all that kind of stuff. And then $12 kind of same thing, where I think we took about 3 or 4 months with that one.
Sure.
That one was a little bit more difficult because I'm not, at that time, I didn't know sound design. I didn't know like how to edit audio for a movie. So when
But you took on that responsibility yourself.
tried to figure it out, and just, you know, YouTube tutorials and anything that you can find, it's and just trying to figure it out. And so so I think that was the big, you know, hurdle, where it was discovering how to do coloring for the first time, or at least very officially for the first time, where you're dealing with like raw footage and adding color and grading and correction and everything like that on top of it, which was all new to me at the time. So doing
you wouldn't
all
know
of
it.
that, well,
you
like,
wouldn't know it by the final product.
I've definitely had my practice on like doing color editing and grading and correction and all that kind of stuff on other footage from an SLR, but nothing that was like raw footage.
Yeah.
And so going from like a very pale kind of image and needing to bring out the color and everything, I was terrified. I was like, does this look like shit? Is this awful? And so I appreciate it. I definitely appreciate the you know.
As a viewer, I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Seriously, it was you wouldn't know that you were in the process of learning that.
Yeah,
you know,
it was
based on the final product.
But that's honestly how I feel about most projects, where it's like, I don't know this thing. How do we figure out this thing? And I think that that's a lot of it, where it's like you hope at the end of each thing you are way more prepared because of it, you know, for the next project or film or whatever it is, you know?
Yeah. We had touched on this a little bit in our conversations, you know, before you came in here and on the phone, but are you like formally trained? Is there film school in your background? Like what was your process?
You're right. You know, I think that's not where I'm saying, like, that's basically where my film school is, but I dropped out after the first year. So all of it was kind of more naturally done, where I've always loved movies, and me and Mike were best friends since like the 7th grade. And so we just honestly ended up making movies and learning filmmaking and script writing and just doing stupid, you know, whether it was like a horror parody or like a comedy. Like we made like in 7th grade, we made like 2 hour-and-a-half kind of comedies, but I learned so much about editing and filming and all that kind of stuff just by doing those things. Like, I think one of the big turning points, at least when it came to understanding it, was his dad was big into like computer technology and all that stuff, and he worked at a computer store at the time, and he legally got Premiere 1.5, and that was the one at the time. And I remember like there's this like white stallion on the on the cover of it. But so he, you know, I'm like 13, 14, and he's putting this pretty professional like editing program, at least at the time that was. And so learning it at that age, I think, was just a very cool foundation for kind of like when I wanted to take it more seriously. I already kind of knew the language a little bit. And so like that definitely helped for sure, you know?
I mean, you probably had 5 or 6 years on most people.
I mean, maybe. I think it was just something that we just loved to do so much. And it was just like every day after school, it was like, fuck
everything else,
and everything else. Like, we have 5 hours to make a movie until our parents tell us to go home, you know? So like that was always really just a blast. So kind of discovering that and discovering movies and that kind of stuff through that friendship, I think really made everything else like fun, because it's like when you have that kind of partner, teammate to kind of learn the stuff with and to do the stuff with, that's always going to be
makes it a lot more fun, makes it more enjoyable, makes you want to keep going for it
every time. And it's just becomes kind of like there are still times like even on some moments on the Honagold set, like he would just we'd try and be as super serious as possible, but there were moments where he would just like, it's been this way since 7th grade, where he would just make me laugh, and I would unfortunately ruin something by laughing. And it's like we would be in a classroom together in 7th grade, and he would just, you know what I mean? So like it's just been that way. Even on sets now, it's the same way. So it's just, there is always that kind of fun camaraderie with it too, you know?
Sure.
You know?
So how did Honagold come about?
So similar thing. I think it was a similar thing to Mason, where I'm trying to kind of remember the early like start of it. But I think one of the big, I'm actually trying to remember the actual like kernel of the idea, because it's definitely from Bazzacco and his wild mind. And I think the situation was, at the time he was working on a script called Keep Heaven Close or something like that. And it was a featurette, like a short film. And that was the kind of start to Honagold. And he had the whole idea and story written out like this kind of back and forth between an entity and a human and like a person. And then when we started actually trying to get the idea off the ground, it kind of just became something
completely different.
Well, not completely different. It definitely has still like the ideas of it, but we went through everything so much and changed up so much, and that it did in a way become something brand new, you know?
Sure.
But it did start at least from there, and then from that point, it was just, all right, how do we actually make this and pace it out in a way where it's super like patient, but you feel the tension around the corner, hopefully, you know what I mean?
Definitely.
Okay, cool. Cool.
Definitely. Same thing. I look at a movie and I'm like, 23-minute runtime. What am I getting myself into?
Yeah,
but I was pleasantly surprised.
Thank you.
Just when, I thought that there was going to be breathing room, you ramp up the tension.
Yeah.
And there are constantly these twists and turns that were really quite engaging, and I did find myself asking pretty much through the whole like at the beginning I was pretty sure I knew what was what.
Sure.
And then about halfway through I'm like, I don't know if I know what's what anymore.
I'm curious to hear what you thought it might have been like initially.
So at the beginning, well, and maybe you can correct me. Maybe I'm totally off base. I don't want to ruin
That's kind of the point, I guess. You know, but no. Go for it.
My interpretation of it was
totally not to put you on the spot either. I'm just curious.
I can give it a gander. I'll see what I can do here. I thought that this was because at the beginning, it's this guy being interviewed, clearly a musician, and he's talking about a record that he produced or a song that he produced.
Yeah.
I'm not clear about which one. And he says that, my father helped me on it, and then jumpstart into the movie.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that we're jumping into the past, like way into the past.
So
No?
No, but so I mean that might be our fault for how we told it in many ways, but the concept is that his father is gone by this point.
Yep.
And that his father, we kind of wrote like this history of a light history of his family before, like we tried to figure out what is this character's history and
there's
where
kind of
are
the
we
sister and there's the
starting
mother.
now. And so like exactly. So there are all these family members that are talked about or maybe even seen like as like visions or something like that in the movie.
Yep.
But we wanted to start the movie being very linear and starting it off at a point of this character's life. And the way we see it is probably within the same year of after his father's death. Mm-hmm. We saw his father as being a really, really successful musician. Mm-hmm. But his success was brought out by his muse, which is this entity
that's haunting the house,
and that's his father's muse. And the story we thought would be really interesting for the son to try and adopt the same muse, but she's just the entity is just not having it.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So like the entity is like, I don't want to do anything with you. So it's this back and forth kind of thing, and where both people feel trapped in the same situation. I get, like, you know what I mean? So
I do. I just think it's very interesting because I
don't know if that comes across clearly in the film, but
it does. But I think the one caveat that I would give it is I honestly thought that was a flashback at the beginning
of him being interviewed.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was my interpretation that was like, many years like later after the events that you then cut to.
Okay.
And it was kind of cool to me because I got that the father had died, and I thought that, okay, the father dying, that's still present when we go to the nighttime scene.
Sure.
But then it's kind of like all the same thing you just said, like all the ghosts, the muse of his father, but also all the demons of like the mother. And I almost interpreted the muse in the basement. I almost interpreted that as like, maybe his daughter and the singer-songwriter's sister. And like, that was kind of the muse that the father was driven by. Like maybe she died at a young age or something. So like I had all of those things going on. So it's not too far off from what you intended.
That's actually really interesting because I think that what we always kind of, not to reveal, I guess, the monster behind the curtain or whatever it is, but I think we always tried to kind of go into it with a little bit more ambiguity of just kind of it being this hyper powerful force. Almost, we kind of saw it honestly as like this very supernatural, almost fantastical kind of idea where the history of it is so weird that it's not we show it in bits and pieces through or through dialogue throughout the movie. Like we give clues to what it could be or what you think it might be, but we always looked at it as Honagold is this fallen angel.
Okay.
And she is a fallen angel by basically being somewhat of a demonic figure. And so now this father is harnessing her powers in order to kind of create this beautiful music.
Sure.
And so that was kind of how it's almost so silly, it sounds like, you know what I mean? Like, but we kind of liked the fantastical element of that a lot, where we're like, okay, there's this actual weird entity that somehow this father is able to utilize, and they're able to like have this weird bond and relationship. And now how do we disrupt this whole thing with this new character of his son, you know? And
Gotcha.
that's where we kind of wanted to start the short. And we've always had this idea of like, it'd be really sick to show the history if we ever made it into a feature or anything like that.
Yeah.
But at least that's a short. We're like, okay, where does our story begin with this, you know?
I really liked it.
Thank you.
And
Thank
like
you.
even with him going outside the house, like when you flash forward,
Sure,
and
yeah.
him like throwing meat down into the cellar with the light just beaming out, I'm like, what in the fuck is going on here?
Yeah, no, that's awesome that you felt that way, because I think that was the big thing, is just kind of like trying to leave a little bit of like breadcrumbs throughout it with like yeah, and just try and be like, we were always constantly being like, are we feeling too like spooky right now kind of a vibe, you know what I mean? Where it was like trying to find that balance where you would just be afraid walking in this completely pitch black house.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like even if it wasn't this supernatural thing, it's like, how do we make that feeling come out through just him holding the lighter and the camera work and everything like that? And so,
I mean, a few things that you just brought up, I never felt that you went over the top with any of the scares. In fact, I thought it was, again, this goes back to what I said about Mason and $12 words, but I felt it was very character centered.
yeah.
So like you said, kind of going through the house with just the lighter, you just feel you're in that position too.
Sure.
We've all been there, where it's like the power goes out during a thunderstorm and you're looking for a flashlight
or anything, like even just walking up from the basement and it's like, oh man, it's spooky back there. You know what I mean?
Spooky,
like,
or like you see something in the corner that like is always there, but now that it's dark, it takes on a different shape.
Definitely,
and then,
definitely,
kind of the reveal and whatnot. But I think that I really am obsessed with. I'm sorry, say his name again. Ed Ventura.
Yeah, yep.
I'm obsessed with Ed Ventura in this one.
Yeah.
There was something so magical.
I'm always obsessed with him. He's going to be he's doing a new role in one of our things coming up. So
can't wait to see it.
Yeah,
because
he's
this role was unique in particular, and I want you to tell me a little bit about this, how this kind of came about. But his cadence of speaking.
Oh man.
Like the dialogue was one thing. I thought you guys had very kind of Tom Waits, like out there poetic dialogue for him to kind of say.
That's cool that you mentioned that, by the way. Okay, but no, keep going. But
then it's even better because like he took that small poetic dialogue that's kind of interspersed throughout the whole thing, but then he like played with the twang of certain words and the way that they like cascaded off of his mouth, or like he would hold on to one word and then ping pong the others.
Definitely. That
was awesome.
I think and that's all him. I think he really dove. That was a really intense shoot because again, it was a last minute like ask of him to do, not as last minute, but it was just within like a few weeks of us really trying to get who he is as a character, how things are done, because the conversation he's having in the movie, he's having a dialogue with Mike Bizzacco. You know what I mean? Like when we're filming, Mike is literally reading the script off camera to him. So it's not really anything scary that he can work off of. He's just working off of some voice, so his whole delivery and cadence and all that kind of stuff was so important because it indicated a lot of how afraid his character was, but also how his character was trying to puff his chest at the same time. And I think that that's really what we were trying to do, at least from the get-go, is the beginning is supposed to be his most pompous form, you know? So he's talking to this interviewer and he's just like, you don't care what I say, all this kind of stuff. That kind of, like you were saying, kind of like that Tom Waits, or even just like, I think a lot of his research was stuff like that, and also just looking at like old Bob Dylan interviews and just things like that, just folk song, like folk singers that probably had a bit more of like a rebellious kind of vibe to him. So I think that was the initial kind of like influences, but he also just like did a lot of work in like just writing out song lyrics, like not even to use for anything, but just writing out song lyrics to kind of understand who his character is as like a musician and stuff too. So just those small details, I think he really locked in to the character. He always says that he feels like he didn't, or like there's certain moments where he didn't. I'm like, dude, I know when you're off, or like we've worked together so many times that I feel like we both kind of know when each other is off in something or whatever. But I'm like, dude, I love it. Like I love the performance. So, and so does Mike. And so I don't know. It's just one of those things that I think, it could have been done a bunch of different ways. And, I love the way that he chose to do it, where it was just, you really are kind of, you know, going back and forth between this pompous asshole. Even when shit is hitting the fan, he's saying all this stuff where it's like, dude, just stop talking, you know, but he just keeps going. So it's I thought it was such a cool, you know, thing to see him actually kind of take on and to try and like, as a character, really be brought down to the opposite spectrum of where he starts, you know?
Sure. Yeah, I thought he did a really good job.
Yeah.
I would say it was like a pitch perfect performance. I didn't know where it was
I'm
going.
sure he'll love to hear that, dude. Yeah.
Yeah, he really kept me on the edge of my seat. He really did. And so you said that he was writing lyrics kind of like prior to and like thinking about getting into the character. Did any of his lyrics end up in the script?
No. So,
or was that it was just kind of a game for him to, you know, what do you call it? Like an acting,
I think it was more of like an acting kind of exercise for sure, where it wasn't, I think it was always on the table where it's like, if we needed stuff like this, and I think we got shots of it and everything, but it just seemed, I think just what we were stripping down from the movie, it just didn't make it, you know what I mean? But it was one of those things where he would always, I don't know, it was a really interesting thing of how we ended up doing like the music for the movie and finding the right singer for the song at the end. Like the song that he listens to on the record, that is a song that was sung to Mike Bizzacco by his grandfather when he was like a kid.
Oh, really?
And so then we got like our old English teacher, Pete Silva, who was like a radio announcer for like HJY and everything. And he just has this singing voice that's very, very like 70s folk, and it's beautiful, and it just fit the aesthetic so much. So when we had that song, it was like, this is the character's father, this is that. And that was a very important moment, I feel like, to kind of bridge us between when all the shit finally ends and then the ending to the movie, you know.
And was that voice available to yourself, the crew, and the actor prior to filming?
No, we used, I think, as a song, the song choice, that was all post-production stuff that we needed to obviously figure out. But I think the song, like the idea of it itself, was already obviously written, and Mike knew that, like, oh yes, this is going to be the song that we use for this scene. But I think we used Buddy by Willie Nelson.
Sure.
Just because it's that same kind of slow and sad kind of folky vibe to it. So I think just whatever, we just kept on playing that on repeat and just let Ed kind of sit in that moment for sure.
What was the most difficult part of that process? The writing of it, the pre-production, production, editing. Was there anything particular that sticks out to you as being like,
oh man,
how do we get over this hurdle?
I think that's a tough one. I think a lot of stuff went smoothly, and I think just it was a lot of small little things that would just kind of go bad throughout. But I think it's just, as long as you go into it predicting, like, it's a film set shit. It's gonna people are either gonna be annoyed by each other, or something's gonna break, or whatever it may be. Just kind of having a little bit of preparation of the worst, I think, always makes it easier, And when it came to that shoot, I think everything went super smoothly. We had the rug pulled out from under our feet at the start of it. Where
how so?
Funding. So we had someone behind us in funding, and then a week before the shoot dropped out.
Oh, geez.
And so we had to, I think, between Mike and I, we had to figure out like 25. It wasn't a lot, but within a week, trying to figure out 25 to $3,000, to disposable, you know what I mean, to throw that direction. It was something that was just kind of like, dude, that was a bummer. It was a very bummer situation, but we still just kind of, I think, just bit our tongues in that situation because we knew, we just have to keep on. We're gonna do this. We're gonna shoot no matter what. So we just have to figure it out, and we did. And so I think that was the biggest hurdle. And so moving into the actual production was like, all right, well, we got through the worst of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I think our biggest fear was the idea of not having the funding for it. So once we got past that, it just ended up, I think working better for sure.
I'm always curious, if you don't mind, I'd love to go down this rabbit hole with you real quick, but I'm always curious about how different filmmakers go about A, either funding their project, or B, where those funds go. Based off of what you said with Mason, it sounds like you had your own, camera and lens that you decided to go with. It sounds like maybe the people that you were having on your gaffing team and, electric team probably had some lights that got you through it with reflectors.
Definitely.
But like, as you move on to bigger projects, what's that like?
It's all different. I think it's still, I've worked with some people that had a bigger budget for things, and then still people with like nothing. And I think the biggest thing is to just try and learn in both capacities. And so my always biggest goal with a something like a more of a shoestring kind of budget, or just kind of know going into the project, how can I do this on this budget? And like just kind of having like we were talking about earlier, just kind of having those like two ways of basically being able to execute it during production, and kind of finding a good, if you need to do it with no money, then can we do it with no money? And I think it just kind of requires trying to focus in a little bit more with creative thinking on the spot, where it's like, all right, we just kind of literally need to get creative right now. Where with the actual funding, it just allows the obviously did a little bit more grace to find, locations or anything. And so we've never had amazing budgets or anything like that. So a lot of it has come out of pocket, but it really just depends on the actual project. I think the narrative stuff we're still working on to really get something like a feature off the ground and to actually get it produced and financed. But all of our shorts and stuff, I think, have been completely through us at this point,
Sure.
But yeah, it's oh no, I actually don't have too much to add to that.
Well, I guess I would just go into further because I've produced a number of short films, and I found that the biggest hurdle, in fact, was having too much money.
Oh wow! Yeah.
In my experience, and again, this is just my learning.
We've never had that problem. I would love that problem too.
Me and my producing partner Jimmy, we kind of had this. We were dealing with a lot of period piece short films.
Yeah.
We did one World War II. We did one in the late 40s, 50s.
Was that the oh my god, the nuclear?
That was in the
awesome,
early 60s, and yes, that was another one.
But again, the cars, the
cars, the whole,
and also trying to
the wardrobe,
the idea of, all right, we're shooting outside. How do we turn modern day into that?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, for sure.
And I think what I'm getting at is, you talk about having just a few $1,000s on your projects. And this is I'm not crapping on my short films. I'm just saying that I think that me as a director, I was relying on all this money and all these people, where it's like you have such a stripped down budget, stripped down crew, and you just kind of made these things. Is there ever been a project where you knew you needed more money, but then couldn't get it, and you're like, okay, we're going to shelve that? Or have you ever had the opposite approach where it's like, no, this needs to get made, no matter what, so fucking figure it out?
I think that's I think that's always been the way. I think our first big dive into narrative filmmaking was making a feature, and we did it. It was like in 2013.
You did.
We made a feature called Hyena.
I've heard about Hyena. I've heard about Hyena.
Hyena was awesome.
I didn't know where to find it.
I don't include it in my resume anymore, but it's a it's like an hour 55 feature. that one summer. That's where we met Ed. That's where we met Ailey and Alex Rotella, and all of them. We again got very lucky where we were just finding places to shoot and just literally just like, all right, we need to shoot these 3 scenes. We have Ed today. Let's shoot 3 of his scenes this day. All right, we got to find a library. You got to find a whatever and this and that. So it was just kind of like literally putting all the pieces together on the go.
Sure.
Which was the most, the worst way to do it. But at the time we had
what do you mean the worst way? Like,
well, not the worst way. I mean, it would be the best way if we actually had a budget, but it was just the worst way in the sense of we were working off of like Best Buy. We were working at Best Buy at the time. So just like those kind of paychecks where basically every paycheck would just kind of fund that week of shooting. Okay. And so like that was just how we did it for 3 or 4 months. And so we just had this, I would say about a 100-page script that we would just kind of like just chip away at through the summer, and we just stuck with it, and it was a blast. And it was honestly just a blast, like to have that goal. Like there was a point where we were just like, all right, we have 5 scenes left to shoot. I can't believe we're here. And so now with the smaller budget, kind of like with doing stuff like Mason and $12 and Jonah, which were a little bit more seriously done and a little bit more professionally done, we just really, I felt like learned a lot from that kind of the run and gun kind of way through there.
Kind of knew how to stretch your dollar a little bit better.
At least that's I feel like we grew pretty good at doing that because that was all we could do. You know what I mean? Was just like we don't have any more. Like I think the biggest thing is like we always basically have our set amount that we know that we can contribute, and the idea is to literally just budget based on that set amount regardless of thinking of if we can get more or not, so like with that one it was very interesting because it was just like that was a paycheck to paycheck thing. But with something like Jonah Gold, we had a set design idea, and then from there we did our budgeting. But then anything extra would just be kind of like, okay, so now we can afford maybe to add this or do that or whatever it may be,
Where's Hyena? Why haven't I seen it? What's going on?
Hyena is a Vimeo link that's that's not public, and I think it's truly because it's such a novice kind of like first film try that like I'm so happy for the experience. We even did like a premiere when it first came out, like it was like 2013. So I think like we did a premiere at like the Avon, and that was really cool, and all of our friends and family showed up and everything. But I think for nostalgic purposes, I'll always go back to it every once in a while. But it's just one of those movies where I'm like, oof, this can't see the light of day just because of the technical things too that I just hate from it so much. Where it's like, I didn't know how to use a camera back then, so I'm like shooting in like 60 frames per second.
Oh, sure.
So like the whole movie looks like a soap opera in that kind of style, but handheld. So just kind of, do the math. I'll happily send it to you. Just
Please
so
do.
You can
I would
see
love
it.
to see it because that's so impressive to me. Like the way you described that process of just sticking to the task and like, we've got this, 150 page script. We're just going to fucking get it done. Like, that's awesome, man.
I appreciate that. And I think that kind of stems from what we were talking about with school and everything like that, because I don't know how far you went with like the URI experience and stuff like that. But for me,
I went the full way.
Okay, cool. There were so many classes though, that between CCRI and URI that a few that really stuck out to me. And but when I was there, I obviously dropped out, but those 2 years there were a few specific ones that really locked in, and one of them was when I went to URI. The only class that I had in Providence was a screenplay class, and it was like every Thursday from like 6 to 9:30. It was a long class or something like that. And I remember as the final assignment, it was like you have to write 30 pages of a screenplay. And by that point, I was already like 50 pages into Hyena. So I asked him, I was like, hey, can I just finish this as my final project and you can correct the whole thing? Would you be down for that? And that teacher, Max Winter, which is the coolest name, by the way. Like have a name like Max Winter, I was like, that's the greatest thing. But he went through everything of that script and just like didn't like cut it up in like a bad way or anything like that, but just like really like important notes that when I reread them and changed the script based on them, it just helped everything so much more.
Sure.
So like that experience definitely showed me a lot more about screenplay writing and just the overall just how to write natural dialogue or character and those kind of things. And then also working with Mike, who is his bag has always been writing from the go. It's just been a really cool, like, inspiring thing to kind of have both of them kind of work on Hyena with me. And so from that point, it was just like just understanding it more and more, you know?
Yeah, definitely. That's nuts, man. So do you
I might have gone off on a tangent that didn't answer your question.
No,
so I do
no, it's all good.
apologize.
It's all good.
I
It
do
really
that a lot.
I'm following the logic. I guess what I would then ask you is, you know, you over the course of this conversation talking about, you know, your 3 short films and Hyena, it sounds like for the most part, Mike has done the writing, with the exception of maybe Hyena, or maybe you guys collaborated on that a little bit with, you know, Max Winter. But do you find yourself doing your own screenplays? Like, are you writing often?
The way me and Mike write is very much additive to each other. So
Sure.
it's something he might spark like an idea for him, and that will change this, or something might spark an idea for me, and then we both get the ball rolling. The writing experience is really funny because it's all phone conversations. So it's just like me and him we just did it the other night where we just jumped on the phone and started talking about this feature that we're trying to make, and it's like we were just accidentally on the phone for 2 hours, just kind of like dissecting what the game plan or what we wanted to do and that kind of thing. So it's always just kind of been like that, where we've just kind of kept up with each other and like the story of everything. So the physical writing, I think what we'll do is I'll come up with a scene, I'll write a whole scene out, send it to him, we'll add it to the script, and then at the end we'll just kind of end up revising the whole script too, and like we really just smoothen out as we go along, but then as it's done together we kind of just really clean it up in cool ways, you know?
Sure. What are you guys working on now, if you don't mind me asking? Can you give us a log line, or is it kind of close to the vest?
No, not at all, because we've had the script done for about 3 years now.
Feature?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we changed gears about last year to focus on something else, and then we're kind of shifting gears back to this because we just reread it and it's like, this is pretty fucking cool. And I think
it still resonated with you after kind of a break from it.
And I think we didn't shelve it for not liking it or anything like that. Like, we were always very confident after we finished it that this was something that we really dug. But I think we initiated the film, initially started thinking of the film as a much lower budget, as you do, unfortunately. And then by the end of the script, the finale is so crazy just in concept that we're like, there's no way we can do this low budget. So I think it got shelved more for just kind of those reasons of trying to figure out, okay, now we have to kind of figure this out. So our game plan was initially to do a smaller feature and kind of then branch off into doing something bigger after that. But now we're just like, we have so much like momentum with this, and at least of what we already wrote, and we have the treatments and the lookbooks and all that kind of stuff kind of like prepped up for it already. So we're like, let's just have this be the focus right now. When we're aiming to shoot it, I don't know, but the actual, you know, process is starting, you know what I mean? Or at least restarting again for this movie, you know?
Sure.
But to the movie though is
yeah, let's hear it if you can. I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
No, I'm trying to think of the right way to kind of put it into a synopsis, because it's I mean, I guess it's a story about just a mother, a daughter, and a grandfather, and the movie is mainly from the daughter's perspective, if not the whole movie is, not a POV, but just from her perspective.
Sure.
And so her father comes back into the picture and starts revealing some pretty terrifying supernatural elements to the rest of the family, and where it kind of goes from there is pretty intense, and it's kind of hopefully I'm trying to not give anything away.
Yeah.
Not that it's this big thing right now, but it's just it goes off into a pretty demonic, gruesome is the word probably, finale. So we're really excited about it, and we think it really flows in a way where it almost feels more of like a fantastical film, like a Del Toro movie, or something like Spirit of the Beehive, which is a great movie. And they kind of have these very otherworldly just atmospheres to both of them. And so we wanted to kind of do that where it doesn't feel like you're watching a horror movie. It just feels like you're watching kind of a drama or one of those movies that are a little bit more elevated. And then we do a tonal shift, and that's when things really start getting crazy in the movie. And so that's where the script really became the most fun to write. I'll happily send it your way. I'd love your, some feedback for sure, because it's still, we talked about it last night, because it was so, 3 years ago. We're like, okay, we're going to go over this with like a fine tooth, tooth comb, and just try and make everything as like, precise as possible. But,
definitely.
You know what I mean? So yeah, we're trying, and we're trying to see where it goes.
Well, that's badass, man. That really is.
Thank you.
And I guess this hasn't come up in our conversation, but in your resume, in your filmography, you've got a lot of music videos under your belt. It looks like you've got a lot of advertising work. I mean, I work in the film industry. I'm a locations manager.
Oh, wow.
So I guess, what do you do, for work that keeps you able to keep putting out content and flexing your creative muscle?
Sure. For a while I was doing like combating it between retail or something like that. Like,
yep.
I worked for a cable company for 8 years, and just in my free time focus on that. And
sure.
So then last year I made the shift to freelance, and just tried to find as many interesting avenues for that kind of stuff. So doing advertisements or more music videos and kind of reaching out. But it's always kind of been that situation where it's just kind of been a project by project kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So my biggest goal right now is finding that consistency. You know what I mean? Like doing something within the realm that I love, but to find a consistency with it where it's not like, all right, project's done, now I got to fucking find more things to work on or whatever it may be. So I think the biggest hurdle right now is with freelance is the overall idea of just like, you had those really strong months
mm-hmm.
that you have to like, allocate for and everything. And then you also have to recognize that the months that are going to be slow ahead. So,
sure.
Just trying to find that balance with it. But yeah, just honestly, right now I'm currently I'm working with someone to get a kind of like wedding videography thing up off of the ground, where it could be something where like it's like 2 a month, which would be beautiful, just a little extra cash that way. But yeah, just music videos and just trying to find, still doing advertisements for certain places and stuff, and just trying to find the work where it's like, I can at least feel like I'm being the most creative with, So like I was very lucky with the advertising stuff that they were like, do whatever you want. Like this is kind of the area that we were thinking, whether it was like a 90s parody or something. And it's
mm-hmm.
like, do whatever you want with that. And so that was a really cool, liberating thing to do, especially for like an advertisement, So
yeah, I've seen some of your advertisements.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to ask you about that. Like,
sure.
I don't know if they gave you the creative liberty or if you just pitched them the idea and they fucking went with it. But like,
it all depends, I guess.
The Rick Rubin spot that you did, as well
so
as like the 2001 Space Odyssey. Like, you've got some fun stuff in there that kind of is nice homages to, I would imagine, things that you love and things that you grew up on.
Yeah, for sure.
2001 here.
2001 right here.
Well, 2010.
Yeah. 2010.
But the idea was 2001.
Michael Andrew, this one's for you, dude.
But getting back to it, I was saying, like, you seem to have a lot of freedom. Like, what's that kind of working relationship like with the people that are hiring you to do some of your videos and content?
That was through, so like you mentioned the Rick Rubin one and everything. So those advertisements and everything were through Reese Santa Maria, and we have been just like collaborating since Hyena. Honestly, he was doing his own thing with filmmaking, and that inspired a lot of the stuff that I was doing too. Like, he started this small company back in the day called Film from the Future.
Okay.
And I remember that resonating so much. It was so just cool. And he was the first person I saw using like the SLR for the video, like not the first person ever, but at least who I knew. And so just a lot of these things just throughout the years that definitely elevate your inspiration towards this stuff. And so he was obviously he was involved with those advertisements and things. So he would bring me on board initially, and it was just a really cool thing where he was like, yeah, dude, let's just we have the freedom here to kind of explore and do stuff that we want to do creatively. And so like, even with the 2001 parody, that was a idea that stemmed on the production. We were just trying to go in and get like basic shots of the product, and then just how it was done. It was like, what if this was like a 2001 parody? And then it was like, as soon as we started talking about it, I was like, all right, that's the idea. That's where we're going with this. And now we have to do that. And then the Rick Rubin one, that was actually just his idea. He was like, I'm thinking we use this Rick Rubin, podcast moment or this Rick Rubin. It
was from his book, The Creative Act, right?
Yes. Sorry, that's what it was. Yep. And using segments of that and linking them with this industry. And so that was, then from there, it's just like, okay, that's the idea. And I just took that and we put it together. And so that was a really cool experience of just kind of like going off of someone else's idea and seeing if I can, do it in that way that he was looking for,
So it sounds like wherever you kind of, put your feet down, you seem to land in some good creative waters.
Well, I think it's just working with people that kind of encourage it and kind of like, I've worked with a lot of, like just as an editor, or just as like the person that was filming or editing, I've worked with people who would just like spout out an idea of like, hey, I'm thinking we'd have this guy be set on fire at the end of that. That's something you could do in post. And I'd be like, I have no idea, but I can try. You know what I mean? And so that was always that kind of like, I will always try to, and for me, it's like, I'm going to try it. And if I fail at it, then I'm going to keep trying it until it looks, hopefully it looks good to me. And so I think that's just kind of been that thing where it's like having a person kind of challenge that and challenge how far you can edit or film or something, and then kind of take it from there, and hopefully you learn something new. So like with that, now I knew about animating fire graphics and all that kind of stuff around a moving person or something. So it just those kind of small things that end up kind of like being a film school in a way too. And so
another tool in the arsenal, so to speak.
And so like with these advertisements and stuff, they're not narrative, they're not movies or anything like that, but they are, you learn so much from them, and you learn about making something that's more product driven and how to flip this story to now focus on the product, or making it more of a product shot naturally, and those kind of things. So it's just kind of that weird kind of like in between of storytelling but also marketing at the same time,
Sure. So I guess to kind of wrap this up, I'm curious. Obviously, the film industry as we knew it growing up is, safe to say, in disarray. Does that affect you in your freelance work? Does that affect you in your producing work? And what's your opinion about what's up with Hollywood right now?
The state of Hollywood? Well, it doesn't affect any,
existential.
I don't think it affects anything like that. I think there's always going to be some kind of avenue to go down with that stuff. And I think for me, it's just trying to find the right one. You know what I mean? Trying to find the right one, at least as a career right now. You know what I mean? So like something like what I'm trying to do is just, again, trying to find that consistency within freelance where it's, you're able to have maybe more than one constant project kind of going on. But so I don't think there's ever any like disappearance of people needing that kind of content or whatever it may be. But when it comes to the state of Hollywood, I don't know. I actually don't know, because it's very weird that the theater system, like where it is now, is very sad, and it's sad to see it just, even with Barbenheimer, I don't think, you know what I mean?
It was like a nice blip on the radar for a bit.
Yeah, for sure. That, and I mean, you always get those, like even with Long Legs recently, it's like, oh fuck, I didn't know this many people were going to be excited about this kind of movie. So it ends up being a really cool thing when you end up seeing those kind of sparks in people wanting to go out to the movies, because like going to the theaters and those kind of things are great because it's an event.
Yeah.
It feels like an event. Like, and I might like watching movies sometimes more at home.
Do you
but-
still find yourself going to the theater? Is that still something that
Well, it depends on the
drives
movie.
you?
I think it depends on like I always want to. And I think that's the big thing. It's like I always like to try and find, like I love going to the Coolidge or the Alamo in Boston, or just anything that kind of makes it more of an event. So like the Coolidge is always cool with that, because they do like midnight specials where I just saw the Planet Terror and Death Proof.
Get out, really?
Death Proof.
They did the double
thing,
feature?
but they presented it on real film.
Oh, hell
and
yeah.
all that kind of
That's
stuff.
the
But
way
it
to
was
see it.
midnight, so it was just so great. And like the projector actually fucked up midway through, so I was like, this is perfectly like fitting for this movie.
Totally
like,
in tune,
yeah. And so there are some moments where like you get stuff like that and you're like, wow, this is amazing. Or like when I saw 2001 on film,
Yep.
and it's like you just see the cracks and like you just see everything kind of like cracking and popping, and it's like dirty film throughout the whole movie. And I'm like, this is sick, because I'm watching something that's 30, 40 years old. At least this print was, so it's yeah, like I love the experience of doing stuff like that, but I think it's the consistency of good movies out there. And so I think that's what's so fun about stuff like Longlegs, is that it's just a good movie. And I think people are just recognizing like, that's just great. It's just a good, strong film, and it's doing well. And that's amazing. But, you kind of anticipate, whatever, Avatar 2, or not knocking on Avatar 2 or anything. I love James Cameron, but I'm just saying that like, for a fact, that's what's going to be bringing people into the theaters. So to see stuff that you have no expectation for in that way, it's really cool to kind of see it actually like pick up. But I just don't know how sustainable it is,
Sure.
Unfortunately,
Not a lot of risk happening in Hollywood these days. So it's nice, like you said, when, a Longlegs or a Love Lies Bleeding or Iron Claw
I haven't seen
kind
that
of
one
breaks
yet, but
out.
I know it's supposed to be amazing.
I think this is the 6th podcast we've done, and I've recommended it to all of my guests.
Everyone says it's great. I mean, Rose Glass is the director, I think, and she did what is it? Oh man,
I don't know it off the top of my head.
Saint Maud. Maud, that was it. Sorry. And it's a great hour 20 horror movie, and it's so precise and like right to the point, but it scared the fuck out of me. So like it's I don't know. She's great. So to know that she did an even bigger project is going to be amazing to see.
Yeah, Love Lies Bleeding sits, I think, at like an hour 45, and it was the perfect length.
That's awesome.
Everything about it was awesome.
Yeah,
I highly recommend seeing it.
That's great. Yeah.
So listen, Mike, where can the viewers check out all of your amazing work? Give us links. Give us places to go.
All over.
It's all online.
YouTube, I guess my Instagram, and Vimeo if you know where to find it. But Michael Higgs. But yeah, YouTube, if you just go searching, you'll probably find a few stuff of mine, and then just coming up as well. So it's the upcoming projects that will be released.
Hell yeah.
In time as well.
I want to have you back on the podcast as you go forward with this feature and anything else you might do, so we can keep updated and keep the people in the know.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome.
Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. All right, everybody. Catch you on the next one.
Bye, everyone.